T2 is good. T1 is bad. Okay? And we keep, the reason I did regression to skill building is if we're not careful, we regress into T1. That's my talk. I could stop now because that's really the whole thing. Okay. If you have a handout in front of you, that would be useful. This is a lot of detail. Do we need more copies? You got a handout? Okay. You're now the handout expert for everybody.
It's okay.
Okay. So this is share the rest. All right. I first talked about non-targeted input in 76, 77. It happened on the Pomona Freeway, Route 60. This insight came to me. I was so excited I had to pull off the road and write things down. And there's now a plaque on the road. This is where Stephen Krashen discovered the concept of non-targeted input. Okay? And it came, and I put it in my books then, but all those books are now out of print. There's a place here, there's a seat. Okay. It all came from the natural order hypothesis, which was our work in the 1970s and early 80s. The work said that in language acquisition there is a predictable order of acquisition. Some things tend to come early, some things tend to come in the middle, some things tend to come late. So in English, for example, in first language and second language, for grammatical markers, ing comes early. It's one of the first ones to come. What's that in the other room? John is playing the violin. Okay. Late acquired are things like the third person singular. In child language acquisition, this is Roger Brown's research, there could be anywhere from 6 months to 1 year between these two, until third person singular comes. In adult second language, the third person singular may never come. We all know people who speak English as a second language very well, and who know the rule, and still don't get it right. My favorite example is my well-respected colleague when I was in the linguistics department at USC, Matt Shibatani. And he was a grammarian, still is, an expert in transformational, Chomsky grammar, all this. And he was my consultant when I had a question about grammar. I would always go to Matt, because he knew everything and all the rules. He knew the rules, has known the rules since he was 9 years old. He regularly made mistakes on the third person singular. And he knew the rule as well as anyone who has ever lived. It's late acquired. You can't change it. You can drill the third person singular all day long, but just like good wine, Manischewitz. Jello. Or was it Boone's Farm or whatever it's it will not be acquired until its time has come. Now, I got very excited about this in the middle 70s. And I know you know what the first thing happened because you were present in 1976 when I gave a speech at the TESOL conference in Los Angeles to a standing room crowd only of 15 people because there were only 12 chairs in the room. And my talk was, teach along the natural order, right? Just tell us the order and we'll do it. Yeah. Not the first time in my life and not the last, I was dead wrong. And that's what happened to me on the Pomona Freeway. You don't teach along the natural order. The natural order is the result of getting comprehensible input. The claim is you don't teach along any order. You just give people comprehensible input. And it was on the Pomona Freeway that I came up with this idea. I think this must be true. Let's restate the natural order. The natural order says first you do number one, number two, etc. The order is not identical. Sorry. I plus one is there for everyone, even if it's a different rule for everyone in the class. And I'm using that right now. I understand that your background in language acquisition is variable. some people know, like Nico knows all this stuff, she's read everything, knows everything, has contributed to it. Some of you, this may be the first time you're hearing it, okay? So there's a lot of variation. What I hope is to give a presentation so that everyone makes some progress, assuming this is not your last exposure to this material. I want people just to make some kind of gain, and you'll get the rest somewhere else. Same thing in language acquisition. So comprehensible input, we call this the net hypothesis. It looks like this. If you assume this is where you are now, and this is the target, the next rule, what comprehensible input does is cast a wide net around I+1. You'll have some I, you'll have some I minus, you'll have a little bit of I+2. Doesn't matter, we'll talk about that. You can tolerate a little noise, no problem at all, okay? So it's there, it's within the net. And as we've seen already, this takes care of the problems easily, with ridiculous ease. You don't need to know the natural order, I+1 is there. It's easier to say interesting things. Undescribed rules, not to worry. It's just a problem if you're trying to teach them consciously. Hard rules, don't worry. Second language requires a lot of, in fact, everybody picks up rules that linguists are struggling to describe. Natural review, I+1 is always there. We don't have to worry. It's never denied, and everybody gets it. And if you make sure there's enough rich input. I want to give you some evidence for this from child language acquisition. This is studies done by the Gleitmans way back. When was this study published? My goodness, back in the 70s and the 80s. Okay, here's what and Tony Cross's research. Here's what these people have found. When caretakers talk to children, and this is moms, dads, older siblings, uncles, aunts, etc., grandparents. Anyway, when we talk to young kids, everything we say, we try to be comprehensible, but we don't tune it to where they are now. We never do that. We simply make it comprehensible. We assume it's going to be there. As the child grows and matures, if you look at the studies, this is Tony Cross's research, the input gets gradually more complicated, roughly in tune with the child's competence, but not exactly. Okay? We don't think, what's the next rule? Let's aim at I+1. Tony Cross's summary of her research is great. The syntax of mothers, even to rapidly developing children, is not uniformly pitched just a step ahead of the child. Some are pitched at the level, some even below, some are considerably advanced to what the child can say. Okay? Same thing is true in the research I've looked at in second language classes. You look at what goes on in beginning Spanish, second year Spanish, third year Spanish, ESL. I put this in my 1981 book. Yes, the teacher makes it gradually more complicated, intermediate, advanced, etc., without always aiming at the exact structure. So caretaker speech is there even in our well-taught classes. This part, really cool. I'll go through it slowly. Let's talk about yes-no questions, first of all, in English. This is a study done in English as a first language, but it's a great example. This is hardcore psycholinguistics. In a yes-no question, let's say, is John playing the piano? When there's a yes-no question, the auxiliary is pushed to the front, right? Right? Okay, good. What Gleitman et al. Did was look at frequency of yes-no questions and acquisition of yes-no questions in children. The correlation was very strong in older children. Correlation was very high. The more they heard, the more they got it. Younger children, it was weak. They weren't ready for it. It wasn't at their I+1. Here's the big deal. The input was comprehensible to all kids. You can tolerate a little noise and be comfortably understanding what's going on. This is brilliant, in my opinion. So this shows, as you see, the best input that they conclude is input that's maximally rich, where there's the most possibility, and comprehensible at the same time. Rich and comprehensible, that's what we're aiming for, right? Okay. Roger Brown, top researcher in first language acquisition, big influence on me in the 70s when his work came out. He says in one of his papers, he says he's asked by parents, what can I do to make sure my child acquires language at maximum speed? Here's what he says. Believe your child can understand more than he or she can say, and seek, above all, to communicate, to understand and be understood, to keep your minds fixed on the same target. In doing that, you will, without thinking about it, let me emphasize, without thinking about it, make 100 or maybe 1,000 alterations in your speech and action. Do not try to practice them as such. There is no set of rules of how to talk to a child that can even approach what you unconsciously know. If you concentrate on communicating, everything else will follow. The hypothesis is same for second language, same for child second language, same for adult second language. We know how to do it. We are born to teach language. Well, I'm going to back off from this just a little, not much, in a constructive way. Targeting, a funny term. Targeting means making special attention to one item in the input, like grammatical rule, vocabulary, etc. We do this a lot. Some of it is good, some of it is not so good. I'm going to say there are two kinds of targeting. Let me be explicit and give you the bad kind first. I call this Targeting 1. Targeting 1, when we do this, and those of you who do TPRS, when we do circling, it can degenerate into T1 if we're not careful. Okay. It's like the Terminator movies, T1, T2. Next Terminator movie is T14. Okay, I'll do that. Are you Sarah Connor? Anyway, the goal in Targeting 2 is mastery of that item. The goal of Targeting 1, thank you. The goal of Targeting 1 is that you want the kids to master this item. And this is exactly what audio-linking does. Like we're going to do the past tense today, by the end of the period, you're going to be able to produce the past tense. This is going to be firm, solid. Okay? So complete is the mastery that you can actually retrieve it and use it in production. Where do you get the items? Not from the story you're telling, but from the syllabus in the administrator's office. It's external. We are given things, and it's going to be on the test, which we all know is the cause of a lot of our problems. Okay? The teacher's job under Targeting 1 is to find contexts where you can get practice in that item. Contextualized grammar is T1. You know the target, you know what you're doing. Okay. Practice in this sense. Blaine and I went back and forth on this. We had a very useful back and forth on Facebook or just on email. What is practice? Practice for T1 is production. For comprehensible input theory, practice is comprehensible input. Practice is not production. I'm going to practice my German. And my word, that means you're going to find a good novel and read it, or watch a good TV show, or have a conversation. It doesn't mean I'm going to produce sentences and get it right. Practice in this sense, you see your skill building. First, as I mentioned previously, learn the new rule, make it automatic, use it in output, getting corrected to make sure you've got it. It does not lead to acquisition. The best we can get is highly monitored performance, where you're monitoring very well, you've learned the rule thoroughly, you say it over and over again, and every so often you think of the rule again and you forget it. My claim is this is fragile knowledge, and this is consistent with studies on direct instruction. It is not a big game. It can only happen with rules that are very, very easy, straightforward, and you forget it. After a while, it lasts a few months, then it's gone, unless you're constantly reviewing. Constantly reviewing. A never-ending cycle. Okay, if we're not careful, we lapse into this, and we lapse into it under the influence of the syllabus. This is what pushes people toward it. Targeting 2, that's the good guy. This is what we do when it works. Targeting 2, the goal is not mastery of the item. Ironically, it results in mastery of the item, even though you're not trying for it. This is the paradox. The goal is comprehension and appreciation of the story. The words to be targeted come out of the story.
Right.
Because you want kids to understand the story. There are many, many ways of doing it. And we should use all of them. Let me tell you about my friend Chuck Norris. I've never met him. There's a great Chuck Norris movie. I love his movies. They're stupid, they have no plots, and there's lots of violence. They're really good. Anyway, there's this one movie, I forgot the name of it. But in the scene, Chuck Norris and his wise teacher, who's really old again, about 60, they're in a hotel room in Hong Kong, of course. And the bad guys come rushing in and they want to kill Chuck Norris and his wonderful teacher. And the fight starts. The teacher goes up to the wall. One guy's closing on, rips the phone off the wall and smashes the bad guy in the face, which violates all the rules of martial arts, right? And Chuck turns to his teacher. Chuck turns to his teacher and says, "What'd you do that for?" The teacher says, "The true warrior uses any weapon at hand. That's what we do." Any way of making it more comprehensible works. And we know how to do it. I like to call this a toolkit. We have a toolkit of tools that help us make input comprehensible. Let's walk through them. Pictures. Tracy Harrell, my buddy, had his students come in, and one of the assignments was every semester, bring in a good picture I can use. So he had thousands of pictures brought in that he could use on any occasion. When you see Beniko, you will see she relies a lot on drawings herself. She knows how to draw. I had this great conversation of many with Jason Fritz, who's taught me so much. And Jason was we're talking about teacher preparation. He said one of the things you have to do in teacher preparation is learn how to draw. Also learn how to get good cardboard, and how to get good colored paper, right? This is important, knowing how to draw a picture, etc. Realia. Translation, absolutely. Not all the time, but occasionally. Translation can help. If you do it all the time, you're going to wind up having a boring class, and people won't be focusing on the message. But when some word gets stuff, again, this is any weapon that's at hand. Synonyms. Beniko uses this, etc. Other people use this. Body movement, TPR, and gestures, and the research, I found studies that show this. Kids look at people's faces, they look at the body movements. It's part of making input comprehensible. Okay. We use all these things. A research program is which ones are useful in which stage. Like it's been argued if you're doing beginning Mandarin, and the language has no cognates with the student's first language, translation will probably play somewhat of a bigger role. The criticism of this stuff is that if you use pictures and body movement, people aren't exactly aware of what the word means. They may get it wrong. So the famous example is the man says, over there, this direction. Some students will think it means finger. Okay? But if you look at the research, it's not a big problem. The studies are done with reading and pictures and all that, and general linguistic context, which is a major source. Most contexts are helpful. Something like 65% of contexts do give you some clues to the meaning. Most, if they're not helpful, they're neutral. A tiny, tiny percentage, like 2%, are misdirective that push you off in the wrong direction. So using pictures, using body motion, using drawings is quite efficient. Again, you're not just using one picture and one drawing. It comes up again and again. Okay. This kind of procedure does not result in full and total acquisition of word in a short time. It results in what we call partial acquisition. I tried to set myself up to this point for the last lecture by talking about Twaddell and about Naja's research. Each time you see a word, you get a little piece, you get a little piece, you get a little piece. So using T2 will result in partial knowledge of a word. Eventually it means acquisition because you're going to keep seeing it again. Because I+1 will be there if there's enough comprehensible input. What we have found so far, and this is partly Benico's work and other people's work, our colleagues, that the result of this stuff is impressive vocabulary development, even though the goal is not vocabulary development. You get it anyway, and it's more effective than direct instruction in vocabulary in terms of words gained per unit time. Benico's been pioneering this called efficiency research, which she will get to, I'm sure. Okay, the way Benico does it is adds a modification to this, an important one. It's the last paragraph. In story listening, you'll see, we pick out items in advance, not only those where you need the meaning, but actually add to the flavor and the richness of the story. There may be words that add a little extra spice, a little extra depth. You don't really need them to tell the story, but it makes the story more interesting, more elegant, or aesthetic. All right? What I've done here on the bottom is summarize all this. Here you see on the bottom, T1, T2, external versus internal, that X should be an S. Expectation, T1 is quick. In fact, that's the expectation. In reality, not much happens. And the T2 is gradual. Skill building versus comprehension. I think I hypothesize. I can say whatever I want as long as I say it's a hypothesis. Successful methods will have two things in common. They rely on non-targeted input, mostly. And they use T2 when they do target. And they result in superior acquisition. They take generously from the toolbox. They don't just take one way of making input comprehensible. I have presented this as definition and hypothesis. I have not presented proof. I've presented suggestive evidence that it's probably true. Because our studies so far by the group show that when you do T2, you do get impressive vocabulary development. This is my only goal, to distinguish these two. I think this will clear up a lot of unnecessary controversy in our field. I expect the Q&A discussion to be lively. Let's begin. With all this in mind, was it comprehensible?
Yes.
On a scale of 1 to 10? Really?
Yes.
This has been the hardest thing for me to explain to people of anything I've ever tried. Believe me. So I'm really happy if it's 4 or 5.
I have a question.
Yes.
What would you say the knowledge of the world or experience of the students, the predictable part is also a
Yes,
toolkit?
and I forgot to mention linguistic context.
Right.
The text already there, all those things. So I should distinguish this. I guess what I mean by toolbox is things we add to that. But I should have put that in. In fact, I was thinking about that as I did it. Great minds think alike. Christine, here.
Yeah. Could you clarify, like, if people are aware of online discussion, can you define non-targeting, like, in the sense of, well, maybe I'll just say that one, and then
Define non-targeting?
define non-targeted. For example, if a teacher finds that, like it happened in the Chinese class, we started developing a story and a phrase that means says to him came up.
Mm-hmm.
And so in order to keep them able to understand, I didn't want to add too many new words all at once. So I ended up kind of letting that help theme
Mhm.
the rest of our time that day. Is that non-targeted because I didn't
To
plan
me, it's
it?
targeting two.
That's what I think.
It's
Okay.
exactly targeting two.
That's
Your
what-
goal was not to master that.
Right. It
Your
was-
goal is to make it comprehensible, and in doing so, you added a little
Yes.
to its acquisition.
Yep. So by contrast, then what would a non-targeted?
You don't have to worry about it. Usually they can get it without any extra work. And most of the time, most of what you say in class, they don't need targeting.
And can I ask
Yeah.
a follow-up? Then how about level of comprehensibility then? Is non-targeted input, we want to make sure that they understand vaguely,
Good question.
very well?
Right.
Yeah.
I think Mama Hoo Hoo is okay. Okay. I think pretty well is okay. Here's part of this. Glad you brought this up. We have a tension. We want comprehensibility, but if we work too hard making sure it's comprehensible, we ruin the whole thing. You no longer can talk about anything. Did you understand? Did you understand? Could you say that again? Come on. Did you go? You can't get a good discussion going because you're going crazy. Students can tolerate a little bit of noise. The more interesting the input is, the more you can tolerate. Look, you cannot say anything in English without using the third person singular. You can't. A lot of people haven't acquired it yet. That doesn't stop you from using it in English class. Hojila, what does G mean? That happened in, we were in Turkey, and Linda was giving a class, Linda Lee, and she used Hojila or Geo. I mean, it's really good, exciting, wonderful. And one guy who's probably an engineer said, what does G mean? And she said, don't worry, it's okay. You know, I really got to know, you know, that kind of thing. So she explained, you know, intensifying and all this. But it was a disruption. She kept it short, which was fine. But you don't really, he's the only one who ever asked. You don't really need to know. I used to, and I still do, give a German lesson when I give my talks on comprehensible input. And it goes something like this. I give the comprehensible version. I first say, speak rapidly in German, nobody understands. And then I say, you know, das ist mein Kopf. Kopf, verstehen Sie das? Kopf, ja, das ist, ja, ja. Hier sind meine Ohren. Ich habe zwei Ohren, 1, 2. Okay. And I draw a picture. I say, Ohren. Okay. 2 Ohren. Ja, schön, ja, sehr gut. Hier sind Augen. Verstehen Sie das? Augen. Wie viele Augen? 1, 2, 3 Augen. If you listen to that closely, there's a little bit of noise there. Like when I say wie viele Augen, people don't always know that means how many. Or das ist mein, you know, they don't quite say. They get the content words, and with context, it's pretty much comprehensible. I would say that's about 4 or 5% noise. Okay? Beniko just posted a German lesson, beginning German lesson. I listened to it, and I could tell, if you didn't know German, there's a little bit of noise there. But it's easy to understand. Let's not worry about making everything transparent 100%, that they understand everything. We can go with a general common sense, I pretty well understand what you're saying. If the discourse that follows makes sense, you're doing okay. When I read in the languages I'm intermediate or advanced in, and there's a word I don't know, I keep reading. I make kind of an unconscious guess, and if the rest of the discourse makes sense, I keep going. Even though I don't know exactly what the word means, I get something. And that's the way we acquire language. Big, important point. Yes?
There are some adult learners who've been exposed to skill building tools, and they keep on banging away and banging away, and finally they acquire some degree of fluency, which they immediately attribute
Yes.
to skill building.
Yes, it gets the credit.
So what do you think really happens?
It's acquisition. They're getting more comprehensible input than they realize, but they give you credit to skill building. Skills only is not going to get you anywhere. Read the case history of Gouin, the guy who invented this motion method. The way he started is he was living in France. He wanted to go to Germany to study philosophy, and he used the classical method. He did grammar, wound up memorizing the whole dictionary, all of it, everything, and repeating it and reviewing it. He could never understand anything anybody ever said. He never gave up on the classical method. No, I have to do it again. No, it doesn't work. But when you Everyone who's had success has had comprehensible input. Look at it this way. We have several possibilities. Comprehensible input and grammar. You have success from comprehensible input alone. You have success from comprehensible input with grammar. Grammar alone, no. That's what I have found with the case history analyses. Therefore, what's the factor? Comprehensible input. It's always there. Grammar sometimes is there, sometimes isn't. That's why in case histories you have to look at a lot.
I'm a little stuck. I've had a class now for 5 years and I've taught in English. And the most non-targeted input, since it was TPRS, was probably questions. Because I asked...
I'm sorry, the non-targeted input?
Yeah, I just asked tons of questions. But after the 5 years, they understood all the questions all the time because they always gave the right answers. But they can't form them correctly. So I'm really wondering, what do I need to change? Because this is something that's important, that they can ask questions.
What kind of class is only questions?
It's not only questions, but there were so many compared to how I used to teach in the traditional teaching. I asked hardly any. I explained how questions work, which is really difficult. I used to. And then we just went on. But now, with TPRS and all the stories, there are so many. Did so-and-so do that, or so-and-so do that?
Oh, we're talking circling.
Yeah,
Really?
exactly.
Okay.
From circling. They got
Circling, I think, is part of the toolbox. I've seen it done brilliantly. I've seen it done where it adds to the richness of the story. Watch Jason Fritz do it. You don't even know he's circling. The story is exciting because of the questions he asks and the surprise answers. And it's not done every class, every moment. It's one of several tools that teachers use. Mostly in these classes, there's lots of comprehensible input and interesting stories. Try doing more stories and less questioning. And one thing, some of the class should be stories, like Kaniko's recommending. A lot of it should be stories. We use it as a part of the toolbox, not as the only tool. That's when it gets boring.
I'm not sure if that really did get boring, but I had a feeling that they only focused on what they needed, like the does in
Exactly.
the beginning. They
Yeah.
they don't.
You
need
want
that.
them to get in love with the story, forget that it's in English. That's
But I
the...
think it led to them not being able to use do or does because they only look at the verb, which they
Right.
need.
Right,
So they know
right.
it's
So
a
you know the
question.
answer.
Yeah.
Exactly, they can't
You know
form
the
a
answer.
question. So they go abroad and they can't form questions.
We had Mike first, who's patiently with his hand up.
I didn't have my hand up.
Oh, you didn't? Why not?
Well,
Come on, okay. Okay, go ahead.
Do you have any suggestions? I work in a district where we have 4 marking periods and we have in each marking period the kids get a grade and we have a benchmark exam. And how do you give summative assessments?
Okay, let me first explain who I am.
You don't believe?
I am an ivory tower
Okay.
university professor with no deep understanding of your day-to-day problems. If I taught with you for 3 years and we worked together and I became your assistant and I started teaching for another 3 years, I still wouldn't know what you know. I wouldn't have the deep understanding of the system. So I don't know about ways of getting around the system. What I can warn you about is this. First of all, the comprehensible input-based methods, the kids are going to do fine on just about any test. That's the real answer. But if the police come in and they say you're not doing drills and you're not doing grammar, what people sometimes do is they close the door and they do stories, and then the principal comes back and you whip out the book, the drill book. The problem with that is that grammar gets the credit, just like your case, and we perpetuate the damage. The answer, I think, is more comprehensible input, and the beauty of these meetings is that all these people have heard your question, and they're going to tell you later how they get around it, because they know better than I do. Okay, there's hands back here. I answered the questions. Fantastic. Yes.
So I'm totally for all of this, since I know that there's a structure that the teachers like to work around. So putting the structure on the board at the meeting, that's
T1,
okay.
and that's skill building, and I'm saying no. The research does not support it. As interested as we are in grammar, and as beautiful as we think it is,
So that's non-targeted, it's just.
That's skill building, plain and simple. Skill building, and it can be converted into T1. Where if you drill it, it's usually combined with T1. You teach them more consciously, then you drill it again and again until you can actually say it to get it right in front of you right there in class, which runs counter to everything we know about how the brain does language. And it's the most frequently used technique in classes. We have a long way to go. Yes.
I'd like to go back to Charlotte's question. Maybe it's a diversion, but I also have this problem that my students have hear questions from me for a long time, for years and years, like 5 years, and they still can't form the questions.
Well,
correctly
question
in
formation,
English.
first of all, is late acquired.
Number
Number
two,
two, yes. Number two, maybe you want to tell some more stories and have them do more movie talk, other things, do more reading. Life is not just questions. We're overdoing it. Again, I don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater.
They're
A lot of
reading
it's
every
great.
week in my class,
Pardon?
free voluntary reading every week in my class.
I'd like you to do it every day for about 10 minutes, rather
I
than
don't
once a
have
week.
them every day.
Okay, once a week. Your job is to get them excited about any author, about any genre, and they'll be great. They'll be fine. Yes, in the corner, and then you.
So you're talking about translation and it can be good
Yeah.
or not, depending. What is your opinion of videos with subtitles? And so video target language, subtitle in the language that's their native language.
Okay, I'll give you my answer based on years of research and experience. I have no clue. The research is not really directed at this. We really don't know because we have to know what students are focusing on. And I have not tried it myself. I don't generally watch movies with subtitles. We need lots of case histories. We need clear hypotheses of testing this. And we have a control group that does it one way. You know, is it better to have subtitles? It could depend on the level of students. That's my way of saying I have no idea. If it's interpreted as comprehensible input, it's going to help. On the other hand, there's not much language in the whole movie. Just subtitle. Even if it works, I wonder. I know the folk legend is that Finland has great English because the movies are subtitled. There was another one? Yes.
Yeah, I wanted to add to, I had the same experience. I teach French, and I think Dr. Krashen is right. The questions are one of the things they learn at the very, very end. That's my experience as well. So I guess we just have to know that, just try and just be patient. You know.
More input,
Yeah.
but not just questioning.
No. Yeah. Exactly. So I have a lot of opinions, but on Monday, what would be a compelling reason to ask questions in class?
Promoting discussion and helping make the story interesting. Like sometimes, Jason and other good teachers, you do this, I'm sure, where you ask a choice question like circling. The answer is a big surprise. He's a big man. Look at his house. Does he have a big house or a little house? Actually, he's a very little house. It's only 2 inches. Okay. Some surprise. Something that pushes the story along, that makes it interesting. Those are the good ones.
Yeah, and I think there's lots of reasons. One of the reasons we heard on Monday from Blaine was that one of the compelling reasons to ask questions is to slow down teachers. Because teachers have a mentality to do too much too fast. And so when we ask a question, that warrants a response. And we get a sense of the input that's being processed by, and we're all going to process something a little bit differently, but we get a sense of that. So I don't think input is necessarily, or questions is the input. I think it's a tool by which we can gauge, are we going too fast? Are we at the right speed? Are the learners with us?
What you're looking for is comprehension. It's not fast or slow, but is it comprehensible? The problem with going too fast is not the speed, but comprehensibility. And if he says doing a question is a way of making sure it's understood, I can understand that, especially if it's integral to the story and interesting and pushes the story along. Then you've got a good one. Not fast or slow.
I think you should explain about non-targeting. I don't think they know what non-targeted thing is.
If you just talk
Yeah, they should tell
and
us.
you don't have a target and there's no specific item or grammar that you're especially focusing on.
Can you repeat Benita's comment? I couldn't hear.
Yeah, it's
She says I should
non-targeted.
explain more clearly, yes.
Okay.
And story listening can be done in three different stages. At the beginning, with lots and lots of support, like he was saying with the toolkits. But the second stage is less support, and the last stage is non-targeted. Teacher comes in and just tell a story. That's non-targeted.
I'm working toward that third stage in Mandarin. Yes, right now I need lots of targeted support. It's great to have it. It's wonderful.
Yeah, this is actually just a comment. Before I became acquainted with the input hypothesis and comprehensible input and all of that, I often had the feeling or the sense that my students learned more from me when I got off the lesson and just talked to them.
Everyone in the room agrees with you. Right? This is so cool. I'll just say my part in agreeing with you, and I'll turn it back to you before I forget. My Hebrew comes from what we call ulpan. My wife and I were on a kibbutz for 5 months in Israel, and this was a long time ago. And the teacher was fabulous, but most of the class was contextualized grammar. She did have a target role, but she made it very interesting. And the last half hour was Bible stories. She did like David and Goliath and gave her own twist to it. Okay, it was totally non-targeted. It was a relaxation. That's where I got this feeling was really acquiring Hebrew from there. We've all had this experience,
Yes,
right?
and so hearing about this and hearing about the non-targeting, that just simply reinforces that my sense was a correct sense, that that's really where the learning was taking place.
On the other hand, if it's not interesting and comprehensible, it's a waste of time. That's the hard thing. Make it interesting and comprehensible. When I presented my theory in 1975 to my best friend and department chair, Larry Hyman, who's a worker in phonological theory, he asked me, I said, this is how it's done. And his question was still the big one. So what do you talk about? It's got to be finding something interesting and comprehensible. That's the task, and it's not easy. I've done the easy part. Let me restate what I've just said so I can make a silly joke out of it. Here's the whole theory. We want input to be comprehensible and interesting, in fact, even compelling, extremely interesting. This is the idea. This is our contribution from the university. That's the easy part. It's very easy to give students input that's comprehensible, but not interesting. That's called school. It's also easy to give people input that's interesting, but that's not comprehensible. We do that all the time. We get off on our own trip. And my colleagues at the university have been very good at giving us lots of input that is neither interesting nor comprehensible. This is the hard one. This is the hard one. Our part is so simple, what we've done. The hard part is taking someone, it was the question my chair asked me, that doesn't know the language, and the first day being really interesting and comprehensible. And we've made tremendous progress in this in the last 20 years, I think. And we're still struggling. It's still the issue.
Can I ask you?
Yeah.
Well, I was just going to say, like in the beginning levels, especially when you want to create a story, there's nothing. Blaine came in and he demoed a story for us. And you have a target, and you put his whatever. The girl likes the boy, and you're starting there, and you're going to create a story with that. When you write girls like the boy, and you're using that as support as you move that around the room, is that T2?
It's T2. It is only T1 if he expects you to master, let's say likes, within that period and repeat it back to you. Otherwise, it's T2.
Yeah, but if it was.
Terry Walsh has an interesting spin on this called the Super 7. You heard of this? Where she says there are some structures that are really interesting and useful, like to, want, etc. And she introduces them. This is T2. It's good to get some comprehension of these things. It's add I+1, and you can kind of, maneuver the input to make sure they're included. It's an interesting idea, I think. I don't reject that out of hand. As long as it's not T1 where you've got to master and you've got to pound it in until they can say that. Yes?
A question that comes up often, and I don't have a great succinct answer, is that there's a feeling that non-targeted means you have no plan at all as a teacher. You just walk in the room every day.
There's a technical term for this, Sherry. It's called bullshit. That's my answer. Thank you, dear.
I
No.
quote you on that.
Yes, you may. This comes from Mel Brooks, who said,
Can you repeat the question?
Yeah, I'll repeat the profanity. Mel, I have to do the Mel Brooks first. Mel Brooks said, I'm regularly accused of using profanity, but that's a lot of bullshit. The question was, if you say non-targeted, does that mean not planning? Can you just walk in and start talking about anything? And that's not true. No. No, in fact, I think it's harder. I think it's harder to do things this way. It's easy to plan if you've got a syllabus and all that stuff. But making things interesting and comprehensible right from the start, planning. There may be some geniuses who could do it without, but I've never seen it. The teachers I know plan all the time. So it does not, let me state this more conservatively, it does not follow from non-targeted that you should go in without planning. It does not follow. We need preparation.
Can you give examples?
Yeah, I was saying the same thing. I was asked, how do you plan for acquisition?
That's the tough thing. That's your job, not mine. Really. How do you make things interesting and comprehensible? Well, I have ideas just like you. I think interesting stories, the way Blaine does it, have been very successful. I think story listening has been extremely successful. If we take it easy on using the T2 toolkit, etc., stories are great. In the beginning, things like physical activities. Over lunch, we talked about teaching meditation, teaching yoga, where it's interesting and comprehensible. Believe it or not, in Turkey, I gave a martial arts demonstration. Actually, I gave a fighting demonstration to the soldiers who were only trained in language teaching and didn't know about hand-to-hand. And you can make it interesting and comprehensible. The first day, the first thing you learn, gun in your face. He's already shot 2 people, you're next. What do? That is compelling. And you can teach a lot of interesting language this way, okay? Cooking, sports, all these things are what we call, I think Justin called it spiced up TPR, where we can do physical activity, etc., as long as it's not mastery of that item. Anything, there's all kinds of things. The idea I like is you have your interests, things that are interesting to you, and you have the student's interests, and you want to get the intersection where it's interesting to both of you. Magic tricks, learning how to juggle.
Practice is an essential part of acquisition, right?
When practice means comprehensible input, yes. When it means output, no. There is no evidence that you must output. In fact, there's a lot of evidence that you never need to say anything. How about that? Counterintuitive, I know. I know, but I can't change the research. I'm a prisoner of the research. I can give you study after study that shows it. A couple that I mentioned here, the Valpas River area in South America, and also Armando. They went for a long time without saying anything. Okay. Another case you may enjoy hearing has to do with Werner Leopold. Werner Leopold was a German linguist who studied bilingualism, and he studied his daughters. His first daughter they raised in Germany, and she was fully bilingual English German. The second, they moved to California, and his second daughter, younger, he would always speak German to her, but from an early age, she always responded in English. Always, always, always. And they had a very healthy, good father-daughter relationship, spent lots of time, talked. He would always speak German to her. She would always answer in English. He never heard her speak German. Nobody did. When she was a teenager, they went to Germany. The first week, she went to a party. She met this young man. He was amazed to hear this beautiful German coming out of her mouth. You know stories like this too.
I got more.
Okay.
I heard someone last week in San Antonio say something really great. Because we had the lunch with Bill Van Patten. This topic came up. And anyways, the guy, Doug Stone said, I don't think about what I do as targeting or non-targeting. My focus is on the kids and the communication in the room. So he's like, I thought that was brilliant because this topic has been polarizing because people don't understand. I don't think we all understand what we're talking about. Because once, in my opinion, and I take my cues from Eric Herman, and what he has shared is once there's repetition of the input, once that comes up again, that is a form of targeting.
Well, we have to be intentional for that to come up again. So if we are intentional, are we targeting?
I don't know whether it's necessary to be conscious when you're doing targeting too. That's a good question. Sometimes, Benico's pointed out to me, a lot of stories simply have repetition built in because of the nature of the
Right.
story.
But that would be, by definition, a form of sheltering or
I don't
sheltering's a
know.
bit-
I don't know. It's an
It's-
author's device to make the story interesting, and the author doesn't have in mind language acquisition, but it does help. And then sometimes it is intentional, where you use a word you know they're not going to know, and you know in advance. Benico plans these things in advance. She knows which words she's going to take special care with, and that's quite intentional, and that helps a lot. So it could be subconscious, the nature of the story, it could be intentional. And the second one I would call T2. My goal is to distinguish T1 and T2. That's my goal. So we don't slip back into audiolingual.
Right, I know that. Yeah. Clear on that.
Good.
Can you repeat again about output? That it may, I'm not sure if I got that. That it may actually hurt acquisition, or
Well, first of all, it's not necessary.
Yeah.
It could help indirectly.
Yeah.
If you talk, someone might answer back. And that's called a conversation. And conversation helps, but it's what the other person says to you, not what you say to them. Does output hurt? If it prevents you from getting more input, yes. But per se, no.
Okay.
It's harmless.
Do you have a good definition for output?
Come on.
Well, because some people say if I have you say give a nonverbal reply, and have you say that, they're like, oh, but you're making Stephen say give a nonverbal reply.
I mean, forced output.
But the definition would be for output would be when the learner is trying to communicate something from themselves. Me having you say listen to the answer, and I get you to say listen to the answer. I'm not making you're not.
What I have in mind with output is normal output that is voluntarily generated by someone.
Yeah.
Not forced output, repetition, class exercise, etc. But I think neither does you much good.
Right.
Judy wants to ask a question. Judy.
Yes, Jude.
I think here we have a lot of people who have sooner or later lived in a bilingual situation. How many of you heard of crosstalk?
I know what it is, and you just explain to me.
That's the anecdote.
Yeah, each person uses their own language.
Yeah.
Makes sense.
When I was in the Peace Corps, we were trained in groups and we were put in the same level when there was a girl that was in my group. And then she went to one place, I went to another. I was in an environment where nobody spoke English, so I was speaking French all the time. She had a fellow who was living in the same building as her, who was French and spoke very good English, and she spoke very good French. And they carried on their conversation. She spoke English and he answered in French. And
What's interesting about that is that there is zero research.
and
That would be interesting.
but there was no output.
Yes.
And then we go to visit them, and my husband says, "Oh, she speaks French much better than you do."
Because she was listening to him talking.
She was listening,
to him
and she
talking.
was not
Well,
speaking.
okay, there is a group of people in Thailand who have a institute for acquiring Thai. And their claim is fascinating. They insist on a silent period of hundreds and hundreds of hours, and their claim is that you get better accents that way. Again, very interesting. How about some investigation? That to me is the question. I think it's a very interesting hypothesis. By the way, in the Star Wars movies, interspecies communication is crosstalk, right? And from people to robots. R2-D2 doesn't answer in English, but R2-D2 understands and answers in. So there's the precedent.
Yeah,
Yes.
one part would say that I've done it, and the good thing is your affective filter is more system. And you're
I'm
not
not
trying to
surprised.
understand more because you're focused on what the other person is saying instead of thinking what you're going to say next.
Right. Unfortunately, what we sometimes do is each person speaks the second language because they think output is going to help. I like crosstalk better. But again, let's find out. That's something for the researchers.
And this will be my last question.
Ever?
Until later. No. When Jason Fritz, you said before he asks questions and you don't even notice it.
Mhm.
Is that non-targeting or is that targeting?
He's targeting. He's targeting in general, but not necessarily. Good point. Sometimes it's possible to just ask a question that just pushes the story along, where you're not trying to explain a new word, and that's great.
Well, I feel like TPRS never tries to explain a new word. It tries to create conditions for acquisition to happen. So when he creates that condition by asking that, I'm trying to figure out what that is, or what you are trying to, when he asks a question and he does that, his things that he does, what definition are you using that he's doing that I'm seeing that I call something else, I think?
Sometimes it's T2, sometimes it's Targeting2, where there is a specific word that comes up that he's using in the question. Sometimes it's simply discussion of the story and keeping the story going and exciting. Both are legit, and both indirectly lead to more acquisition.
So I have a problem because a lot of my students ask me to do more talking. They always want to do more and more
They want to talk, yeah.
They want to talk. And sometimes they are not ready. I don't know how to explain to them that they should listen to me more.
Well,
Or
yeah,
do
what we
more.
sometimes do, we're struggling with this. What we sometimes do is before the first day, we give a general outline of theory in the target language, and just in their own language, tell them how it works. I'm trying to sell more books this way. And also, what I mentioned in the talk, pop-up theory, where occasionally you bring in little points, little bits, like, look, when you're giving me an answer, don't worry about getting it right. Don't worry about it. Just listen to what I'm saying. Okay? Or there's nothing wrong with looking at the word wrong. It's fine. And here's a picture that might help, etc. That's theory. It's telling them it's comprehension. Say, don't worry, your speaking will emerge on its own. And hope. The other thing I like doing is an advanced course, like for advanced intermediates, in the second language about theory. It may be more meaningful after they've done it for a while. These are good things to experiment with. We're still beginning this, still figuring it out. Okay, got enough. Okay, thanks very much.